So thank you so much for tuning in to Growth Island again. Today, I got a friend from Australia. He is not only extremely successful, he's a designer that is recognized around the world. I met him in Dubai and he got stopped several times because people wanted to take pictures with him because he's really respected for doing an awesome job. But more importantly for me, actually, he's an amazing human being. So this is Peter Gould. He's the founder of a design studio, and now have places in Sydney, Jakarta, and Dubai. Design teams. Some people call it the Gold Design Team. But what really struck me when I met Peter was his way of being heartfelt. And heartfelt for me is a word that I learned more about in 2020. So when I met Peter in 2018, I didn't really know what it was, but there was that presence of really being there and this special respect and yeah, and heartfelt if you look that more up. And we had some really good discussions about entrepreneurship, life, and yeah, how do we approach these different things, challenges in life as well, and acknowledging that life is not always easy, but how do we get the best out of it? So since that day, I've wanted to talk more with Peter, and we've been writing back and forth once in a while about different things. And I'm extremely happy, Peter, that I finally got you now on the podcast, and that you would take the time to share some of your experiences.
Oh, thank you, Matt. I mean, likewise, it's big blessing. I've really enjoyed that time we had, and I can't believe it's been 2 years already. But that was I really got to see you in action as well. Leading a group of people and helping them develop their own ideas. So yeah, it's just great to chat with you. And the world has changed a lot in this time, but then we each need to go through that journey of growth, and being on Growth Island is perfect. So thank you. That's really, so nice to be here.
That's a start. So, Peter, can you tell me a little bit about, or tell the listeners a bit about your journey? How did you get so deep into design, and also, I call it heartfulness. You might say spirituality or
Mm-hmm.
different words, but like, what was part of that journey?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm gonna start in reverse because I think you're that's a beautiful term to use, heartfulness or like-heartedness. Like my different spiritual teachers would use words like mindfulness or presence or having spiritual awakening or consciousness, like all of these kinds of things, or remembrance, prayer. I think these are all have a strong kind of correlation, and the words themselves, the terminology might, people might relate to slightly differently in different labels, but we all kind of have some relationship to this idea of awakening, or have this kind of inner journey, and I think maybe perhaps even this year it sort of feels like, just anecdotally looking around at the kind of things I follow and online and conversations people are having, people are searching and they're seeking and looking more deeply at purpose and looking across the board, and definitely in terms of entrepreneurship and startups. It's wonderful to see that exploration. But so going back a little bit for me then is like, well, how have I formed a relationship with those kind of things and developed spiritual aspirations? So I grew up in Sydney, Australia. Didn't really know anything about any of that kind of side of life, and but I had a fun, fairly uneventful upbringing in southern Sydney, and I love video games, and I loved doing all the things that kids do. But I think my kind of interest and love for design came through just more visually. Like I love the idea of being able to play with graphics and typography and make posters. And I had, back then it would have been like a Commodore 64, or like a, early computer. And then later, like early things like Photoshop, where you could, move graphics around. And just, visual design and graphic design was exciting. And it was also sort of a quickly emerging thing in the mid to late 90s, multimedia, and people were making CD-ROMs with like early 3D stuff. So it was an exciting time, of what is design and digital design. So yeah, so I had that kind of journey, and went into university doing product design, which product design then really went more formally, like things like furniture or industrial design, and the emergence of things like interaction design, like how do humans interface with computers, was still, it was sort of pre Facebook and social media and a lot of that stuff. That journey was about to happen. So great time to be interested in design. And I kind of had the intersection of two journeys. So at the same time, I also started to, in parallel, have just a series of interesting things happen in my life where it became led me to become more, asking questions and having more introspective type of thinking, or kind of like a, esoteric thoughts that I think a lot of people probably do about that age, when they're late teens, early 20s, and starting to question things. And I was just very fortunate that I happened to meet people that are on what I'd call, like a spiritual path now, and kind of jarring in a way, because I'm like, well, hang on, like, do people like still believe in God? Like, isn't that an old fashioned sort of thing from medieval times? Like, like, so I kind of went through this 2-year journey of questioning and meeting people and having, doing, reading and understanding. And I felt ultimately that I think, you know, for me to sort of have this tranquility in my heart and this confidence to be happy with my place in life, I needed to both embrace this kind of more rational, like, understanding of certain things and how the world works and what needs to do, and also an inner kind of acceptance of, like, okay, well, you can't control and design everything. There's,
Mm.
some things are happening to you and some things, but you can definitely try and create this tranquility in your heart. So the short version of all that, of summing up, is I think thematically my life so far has been trying to explore the intersection of creativity, design, and spirituality, and also becoming a parent and running a company, all those things mixed in together.
Yeah. So what have been some of the path or some of the important events in your life to getting to where you are today, having a design studio, several design studios around the world, being asked to do amazing projects around the world? What have been some of the key things in your life, do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, well, I mean, we were just reflecting a little bit back on points in the journey. I think, to share a little story, like when I was in maybe late high school, like, grade 10 and 11, to earn money, what, the sort of the accepted thing to do, only place you could get a job at that age where I was work at like your fast food outlet. So I had a job at McDonald's, right?
Yes.
Classic 15-year-old, earning your $4 an hour. And it's just, but around the same time, I was getting exposed to things like Photoshop and graphic design. So I had this moment where someone in my class was running this little card game tournament or something. And they were like, they were trying to draw a poster, and I was like, huh, I can make a poster. I know how to use this software. I'll make it. And then they're like, oh, really? Sure. And they're asking how much, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't know, $20. I just kind of remember picking, like, that's sure, that sounds like a good. And he's like, yeah, okay, sure. So I was like, great. So that was my first experience, and I went and made this poster that's probably very embarrassing to look at now. But at that age of about 16, 17, designing that poster and getting paid $20, which is the equivalent of working pretty much a whole day at McDonald's. I was like, this is this is what I want to do with my life. It's not flipping burgers, it's designing things that people enjoy using, and getting paid to do it. So that was, I think, a key moment for me.
Mm. Makes a lot of sense. So what do you think you have done different from many other designers in your path to where you are today?
Yeah, I think around the time of when I was getting to learn about design, when we think about design, for a lot of people on the street, if you ask them what is design, or what do designers do, in fairness, they'd say things like, oh, I don't know, maybe fashion design or interior design, maybe transport design, these kinds of things. And I guess for those that are more directly exposed to it, they'd think about, oh, maybe you design apps or interfaces, things like that. And and uh, and that's great. I think um, people that are spending more time and looking at design more broadly, seeing how it's integrated, how it's like this this incredibly powerful transformative mindset for change. Design is really something we can all embrace, whatever field or place you're kind of working in. So I think the difference of where by embracing that, but also having this kind of this spiritual journey throughout over this time, I've always trying to thinking how these two related. So, you know, for example, one of my teachers shared like, well, the contemplative person, I'll start the other way. The eager person will go out from the day and saying like, what am I going to do with the day? And then the contemplative kind of spiritual person will go out going, oh, what is the day going to do with me? And so like this is like, what is the relationship of you designing your world and then surrendering that the world will happen to you? And I can't say I have the answer yet, but I think in my design practice and in the way I like to talk about is accepting that there's certain things you can bring into your design thinking and process that makes it really at another level of meaning. So bringing in sincerity and intention, at a really deep level, like what are you really trying to do with this project? And so it's okay if you need to think about, customer acquisition and lifetime value and click through. That's cool. That's important to make things kind of be sustainable. But like the impact and meaning, the at a very deep personal level, even by just changing the language around heart-centeredness or like-heartedness, or what hearts are you trying to illuminate through this process that you're doing, it changes the way people think about it. So I think that's why people have found our practice, our design team interesting, because you sort of tend not to get that from big top tier design firms and your BCGs and your Deloittes and your IDEOs, amazing teams, amazing people, but they'd probably shy away from talking about traditional concepts of sincerity in like looking at like heart-centered design and looking at empathy at a very deeply personal way is something that there's only so far they might venture. So I think, that's my attempt to answer the question.
Yeah, makes sense. You mentioned the whether like what do I want out of the day and what does the day want out of me. I think okay, I'm
Yeah.
very curious about that because I'm a person that plans a lot. How does that
Yes.
work? So is it like just I'm guessing it's not just waking up in the morning without any plans. I'm guessing that that there's something more to it. So could you elaborate on that? Or
Yeah, well, it's something that I'm still navigating. Everyone is like, there's no one magic formula, which is also part of the acceptance of like that you can't just have a formula that solves life. Like, what is a goodness? What is good life? Full stop. Like we know that it has a lot to do with things like gratitude, with presence. Those things help a lot. But I think specifically around that idea of like how much are you planning, controlling, and designing your life versus accepting and being in a happy place that there's things that are just going to happen to you. um, so that was like a parable that someone shared with me. But I asked my teacher, like I have different spiritual teachers, and one of them who spent many years, with great masters and, people that are long since passed, as well as like running a really successful company. So I find these guys kind of interesting. It's not just like Obi-Wan Kenobi in a mountain. It's like, he has the Jedi training, but he's like out there, like trying to manage employees and live a life. Like I find those kind of people fascinating and not always easy to find. Anyway, and I kind of said like, well, how much do I kind of exert myself and try and plan and design and create and like build a company and design products, and how much do I try and put a dent in the universe, to quote Steve Jobs, versus like letting the world just kind of find my place within it, and kind of let the world kind of pull me along. And 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 I, again, this is like a lifelong question, I think. But anyway, his answer was, well, you need to have reliance on God. All right, or however you want to relate to that term, the creative force in the universe. Have some sort of reliance there. But reliance also means using your talents, your gifts, your inspiration, your energy, your connections, and your communities, and your all these things. They're gifts that have been kind of given to you, that you've kind of been blessed with. So just sitting around kind of waiting for the world to, for God or the divine to like do something is actually not fair, because you've been given so many things already, like, the fact that we have all this technology and these means and design thinking, and we have, lean canvas, like we have them for a reason. Let's use them for good. So that's the kind of stuff I talk about in the heart of design, which is this this kind of this course I've been exploring and experimenting with.
Yeah. And can you say a bit more about that, the heart of design, your thoughts on that? I know
Yeah,
you're
so
a
the
very
heart of
curious person, and that you are taking in everything from, if you can find a Stanford course or YC and so on, and then mixing it up with your special spice on it and your background. So I'm guessing the heart of design must be part of that.
Yeah, well, I mean, that right. It's just I realized that well, people started reaching out when I was seeing like the kind of projects we were doing, and asking questions, and a lot of them were from the Muslim community and the Islamic economy, which is kind of where our focus has been. So my particular kind of path and trajectory has been through the Muslim faith, but that really is I think you can apply whatever spiritual path or whatever, that how you resonate with that. um, how it's been in this particular way is thinking about uh, the heart of design is really the intersection of those things. Like, so for example, I was doing things like going to the Stanford, doing the Stanford course for a couple of years, which is like D school design thinking, really great, really inspiring, great tools, and the tools and the practical approach that is helping lead innovation in the world. Like, the companies that are changing the world and transforming lives are using all this kind of tools and techniques. But then on the other hand, I was also just personally, and people around me were trying to explore meaning and purpose, and at a deeper level. And okay, what's our really our spiritual kind of connection to our existence here now, in our journey that we have. So the heart of design is an attempt to explore what happens when those two journeys are complementary rather than just separate tracks in life. And I think a lot of us just treat them as kind of separate tracks, which is okay. Like, you're here and you're building your startup, or you're working in a company, or and then on the other hand, it's a personal experience of like, okay, well, I have my meditation and my mindfulness, and that's just sort of how I that's how I like to manage my state and enjoy inner kind of space, which is cool. But if you directly think about them together, it can be quite profound, because you have people having these quite transformative experiences in personal or professional journeys when they're kind of considered and designed in the same space. So for example, like, and I get this is totally not for everyone, and some people just kind of switch off when they hear certain words. But if you take, for example, something like a business model canvas or a lean canvas, like a classic kind of popular entrepreneurial tool, and then you take things like personal intentions and personal values and spiritual aspirations, and then use them in one canvas, like, which I have one called the heart-centered design canvas.
Mm.
It's fascinating, because some people really resonate with that, where in the past I might have struggled with just like customer segments and value proposition design, stuff like that. When you change the language to more like communities and transformative experience, and talking about personal intentions for those people, some people, it lights them up, and they all of a sudden it's like you see this glow. So the heart of design is a whole series of these types of I guess integration of these things together. And we do, so it's sort of a little bit of life design, a little bit of kind of startup design, and yeah, it's been fun. Like, I'm still early in that, so I'm sure in 10 years I might hear this and be really embarrassed by what I'm saying. But it's kind of, we're all in a journey. Everyone who's going through these courses together, we're figuring it out. We're trying to.
That sounds amazing. I think my lesson when teaching a lot of startup techniques and so on as well was that most people forgot the most important question is like, what do they want out of life? What do they want to contribute with? So they started a business with their like business model canvas or something else, and like, yes, I gotta make this big business, but they never thought about what kind of life were they gonna have, and what would they actually bring in of themselves. And I found that you can solve many challenges, but if you don't, if and you can solve most challenges if you really have yourself in it as well and really know where you're going. Of course, there's going to be things that you can't just solve, but it really helps a lot. And Tony Robbins talks, he has a famous TED talk as well where he talks about being resourceful. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what I'm hearing you're saying, and that would be combining some of those things. I'd love to see that at some point, Peter.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, I'd love to get you. You should definitely be one of the guests in our class. Like what's been fascinating is in the current cohort, the people. I don't even want to call them students because they should be my teachers. They're some really successful entrepreneurs and design thinkers and design educators are taking the class. And I feel like they're junior. And I was asking like, why, why are you taking this class? Like I should be in your class. And I think it's precisely because of what you mentioned. It's that integration of two different parts of their lives and bringing. They might have, for example, just before this our chat, I had a call with one of the students and or learners, and they've I think created a really good, like really impressive technical prototype, and they've done all these things right, and they've got really nice experiments and Trello boards, and like I'm like, this is great, but they really struggled over the last year. They were sharing with me that about really finding the strong emotional connection to this thing. And I said, well, a lot of the people that I chat with have this strong sense of drive and passion and purpose, and like some story, something's happened to their life, but they really struggle to know then how do you take it from to the next sort of chapter. So yeah, it can go both ways, and
Hmm.
I would love to see more in our design communities this more direct kind of heartfulness in the conversation. And I think, Mads, you're a good example. Like you bring these kind of this thinking together in a more integrative way, which is as the kind of design practice, which is great. You want to have that more integrated, holistic kind of thinking.
Yeah. I think it sounds really fascinating, like actually integrating it in a framework. Because I found, at least when I did my startup training, it was kind of two different things, right? I had my coaching with people where I talked about like what really excites you, like what gets you up in the morning, or when is it that everything around you disappears? Like when it's just like you just you're in the moment, or you kind of forget about time. Like what is that,
Mm,
and what is something in your life that's important to you that you want to change? For me, one of the things is mental health. I've seen too many
mm,
people struggle, and that's why one of the companies we're building in Kring in the venture studio is called Aya, which
mm-hmm,
is
mm-hmm.
also in Islam, in the
Yeah, that's
Islamic
a that's
world.
an
It's
Arabic word. Yeah, yeah. Ayah means like sign, or it's also in the Quran, in the sacred text, it's like a verse. But ayah
yes,
is a great word that's like sign, or you know um symbol, something like that.
yeah. We actually looked at that for the name, both that and other meanings as well, as like flying swiftly. So it's really like, how can we
Mm-hmm.
help more people with mental health? And that's something that's really close to my heart. And so I also believe that I'm bringing more into it, and I can feel I have a different energy. It's different than when I was sitting yesterday until 11 o'clock working on this in the evening, and it felt right. Where when I'm
Yeah,
working on other projects, if I don't really have my heart into it, and I think that happens for most people, you can only be
yeah,
driven for so long by the desire for success and wealth.
yeah.
Uh,
Yes, agreed. Yeah,
So
yeah. And sorry, yeah, I'm jumping a bit. Like, yeah, yes, and I think you like I'd like to think, maybe more anecdotally, that a lot more people are aware of that, even younger generation, that it's not wealth and luxury and material success are very different from just comfortably sitting with yourself in silence and being in having that inner calm, that inner state. I mean, to me, that's success. If you can be in a state of calm and contentment, like I asked my teachers, for example, like what is success? What is like contentment? And one of them answered, it was very deep, it was very Zen kind of answer, which is um contentment, or in Arabic it's rida, right? This deep sense of contentment with every decision that's ever been made in history and every decision that will ever be made in the future. Like, just that's like a big statement, like imagine being content with like everything ever, like wow. So I thought that was a good answer.
Yeah, I'm definitely not there yet, but it's
Yeah, I'm not making that claim. But I got, but yes,
no,
it's good for us to have, we need to be around guidance, so we need
yeah,
to have, a technical, practical, design guidance, and role models there. But also, it could be the grandmother that's lived for 80, 90 years running a family or a small business, will just have, this abundance of wisdoms that we need,
mm.
so it's taking those things all together.
But acceptance actually leads on to another question that I would love to hear your take on, because I found that most, whether you look at top performers, people that really get really far in their life, or people that are so top performers, where if you look at success from being performance driven, are highly successful. But also if you look from another perspective of success, of being happy, which I think is just as important, if
Mm,
not more important. So people
mm,
that are really happy, but also people that get really far in life, is the meaning they put into their life. That I've never met a person, like the older I get, the more I figure out how many people have had challenges. And it's
mm,
really the challenges that are defining, like whether they
mm,
go a happy
mm,
path or not. And you can have two people experiencing the same thing, like the classic example of the two brothers with a dad that was an alcoholic, and you ask both of them, one is an alcoholic and the other one is a super successful person, right? And you ask them
mm.
like, so why did you get to where you are in life? And the brother that's an alcoholic said, what else could I do when I came with a father who was an alcoholic? And then you ask the super
Yeah.
successful one, he's like, well, what else could I do when I had a dad who was an alcoholic, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So
Great.
what have been some of the things in your life where you've taken a different meaning, or something that's been a challenge, or something that made you grow?
Yeah, look, a great question. And well, first of all, it's like it's over time accepting that's the wisdom. The wisdom is, yeah, I guess that even, the people who embrace that wisdom of these challenges is, how quickly you can accept that, okay, this is meant to happen in a certain way, right? And some people can do it in the moment, and they're like, okay, all right, that happened. I'm not getting to this thing, or this thing is not, this thing was not going to be funded, or okay, but that thing, and we're all each of us are all over the spectrum there as to how that is. But I mean, we each have had challenges personally, professionally. That's just what makes us grow. Each of us with our growth island. I mean, I've had, lots of little islands, a few volcanoes. There's been all sorts of things, earthquakes. I think, well, one little example in the kind of this sort of context is, I got really excited about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when I had these ideas for apps, right? There were kids apps that were for my, it's sort of being around young kids and seeing the kind of games and things that were happening, and feeling like, there's certain type of content or lessons that I'd love to make in an app form, right? So, without really, especially at that point, I really didn't know anything about, like what the level of commitments that, really an app could actually be meaning, like properly an entire company in your entire life. It's,
Yeah.
rather than just like, oh, I want to just make some fun games. So anyway, which is a joy as well, because you want to embrace that optimism. Anyway, so I got my team together. I mean, day to day, most of our work is consulting and helping other companies build things. And, it's, I'm grateful. It's been, really successful and a great journey. But every kind of designer wants to create and build and work things around problems they see day to day. So anyway, we got these ideas together. We put them on this crowdfunding site. And there were four ideas we put out. We said, okay, well, let's try and get $5,000 for each one, right? Just as a starting point. Say, all right, let's just build them. And this is 5-6 years ago. And three of them actually got the funding. It was like great, and it was probably just all my friends and family and whatever. Going, all right, we need to shut up this Peter guy, just fund this thing, and then he'll go away for a few months. So anyway, we did that and we built the apps, and they were really hard, and I was like, okay, this is why it's not so easy. And anyway, one of them was about five girls, right? And it was kind of like these five cool kind of girls with different personalities, and it was sort of inspired by, I've got two daughters, and I kind of wanted to let them have certain game experience and certain things I thought might be cool in an app. We finally got it to market. We finally got it out there, launched, app store and all these things, and much. And they weren't, it wasn't very popular at all. Like, I was like, what do you mean? Like, come on, guys. Like, I think it's cool. But and of course, this is when you're not doing a lot of we'd made a lot of the classic mistakes of just not even validating or thinking about it. But there's so much heart in that idea that people did resonate with it, and the concept and the intention and motivation, but not necessarily the format or the application. We had kind of done basic job on a few things. Anyway, so we called that Salam Sisters. That's what the app was called. The app itself wasn't very successful, by terms of downloads, but conceptually we were onto something, because we had parents and enough people I was chatting with. Is like, okay, this is something, and we want more of this, but like, we need this or that. Anyway, it kind of it was sitting and baking for a little while, and due to then some other success we were having with products we were helping clients design, like a board game and others, one of them came, someone I'd sort of befriended, and said, listen, this board game you helped me design was really successful, and the audience for that game, we think, is very similar to the apps that you're trying to get up and going. Why don't we kind of jump in together, and I'll get some funding, and let's try and do this properly with a bit more research and proper design approach. So we did that. So we managed to create that, and we called that Zalige. That was like a startup focusing more specifically on certain play experiences. And from that, just to cut that short, from that failure of the app, was not a failure. It's just simply learning forward. It then opened up the door to what became a range of dolls, like physical dolls that we had designed and made, which were a lot more successful, and went out into the world. So but I mean, you see this time and time again, is that you need to have all those stumbling blocks. You need to have that momentum and growth and learning, and we're definitely still learning with that Salam Sisters product range, and even the current model, where there's always growing and changing. So it's just but if I hadn't have had that experience and turned that into something positive, you have to try, and you have to get started. I'm sure you hear in your startup world all the time about if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you launch too late. And I know it's a bit of a cliche, but
It's so true.
that was the case. That was the case. Yeah, that was the case.
Cool. But I think really it is the learning forward. So something that isn't as successful, you really learn from that, and it changes your process, or you learn something else that opens a new door.
That's it. I think that's the right think about opening doors, and you're just opening, and you just keeping active, and creating opportunities for your future self by trying and experimenting, and building relationships, and learning, and yeah, it's also it's not a race, and certain things will work, but it's always beneficial some way forward, and it's better to try, and I think that applies as well. Like, one of my favorite books is Designing Your Life, which is the Bill Burnett Stanford life design book, which is sort of about trying to apply the same design thinking and experimentation in your own life. And it also borrows a bit from the Jim Collins, Peter Drucker sort of hedgehog thing of, like, trying to take active interest in a few areas, and then finding the financial engine that powers that over time. So over, like, maybe 10, 15, 20-year arc of your career, the 2, 3, 4 themes that really light you up and engage you, you're continually trying to find ways to keep momentum there. So all of these things, I think, I'm just reflecting back to what I've picked up. It's nothing new, really.
No, makes sense. So one thing I'm very fascinated about is habits. Peter, do you have any habits that you think are core to where you are today, or something that makes you happy, or any habits that you're trying to implement?
Yeah, sure. Well, probably, like, I feel like you have all these awesome guests who would have all these awesome habits, and hopefully I share some with them. So I really into things that you might guess, like journaling. Always try and keep it with no lines, just free sketching and writing. Try and do that often.
In a written
um
book, or do you have a special book for that? Or
I use this, just a plain notebook, like a
yeah,
physical book, with pen, and I try and do that, daily, or at least often, to just have that available. But one sort of movement that's really been inspiring to me is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron, who's this sort of has this wonderful, many people have benefited from her work for the last 20 years. Where it's about fostering creativity and connecting that almost as a spiritual practice, which is she kind of was one of the pioneers of, I think, popularizing journaling and morning pages where you just write, but also two other things. One obvious one, like a walk in nature, like nature walks regularly, and in Australia that's pretty easy to do, so luckily.
yes,
um, and and what she calls the artist date. And the artist date is a weekly practice of setting yourself, allowing yourself one opportunity, a little slice of time each week to experience something new or be inspired. And, it could be go to a gallery or something, but it could also just be, read about something new, or go to a library, or, look at a piece of art. And the other kind of layer around all of those things are, I guess, more of the spiritual practice or faith-based practice. So, I pray each day. I have I follow a routine that, 1.5 billion other people do, which is sort of like, these 5 daily prayers. And one of them is pretty early in the morning. So that's quite, that sort of dovetails really well with a lot of early starting kind of leaders that get up early and do things. So that's kind of helpful, because I kind of feel like I should be up anyway, so that's good. And then just gratitude practices, so ways of trying to be grateful, I think, is, as you would know well, is that helps maintain that state of tranquility, or brings you back to that state when things are difficult. And try to do that with my kids as well.
mm,
So every night, like, what are 3 things you're grateful for? Yeah, so probably none of those new things are unique, but just that, I guess it's that combination, each person. And then each sort of, it's seasonal, right? So we just had Ramadan, for example. That's a whole month of not eating or drinking during daylight hours. So, like, it sounds, if you haven't come across that, like, it's incredibly challenging. It can seem even confronting as well. It's like, really, you can't even drink water? Like, it is, it seems like almost a ridiculous thing to do. But if you've tried it, it's really profound. Like, and personally, you feel sometimes your energy wanes, but like, it's by the end of this 30-day period, you feel like so enriched, like you're illuminated, like we've been through this journey. And it's really quite profound. And if I know fasting is now more into the popular kind of nutritional advice, but that's something I try and at least do annually as a bit of a kind of a of a refresh and a reset.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it's fascinating how so many things from religion, whether it's from Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, or different things, we're starting to find so much science that makes a lot of sense. Like praying, like sitting down and being grateful. Fasting, as you're saying, like fasting is the really almost like the new black in in health
Yeah.
right now, that you need
Right.
to fast. Of course, gotta be careful with, yeah. And so it's fascinating how we're finding so many things to be really good for us, that we now have a Western science
Mm.
approach to saying why it's good. But I also
Yeah.
think
And
like,
yeah. No, go
as you
ahead. Go ahead.
as you were saying, like many of the things many of the other guests do as well. And I think that's so telling as well. Like when I read Tools of Titans with Tim Ferriss, it's very much the same habits that people have. People that get really far and that are quite happy. So that there must be something about it. And I think it's wonderful to hear that you don't need to invent so many new habits, that you can kind of follow some tested and tried habits.
Yeah, I think you're right. And to your point about, I mean, sort of, I mean, I'm very much a Westerner, living, look at where I am, and my schooling and my academia and everything is very much in that kind of system and worldview. And but then, having this, I guess, not not very typical path of like, looking to Islam and then looking into the spiritual path and then embracing that. And then, it's not really reconciling the two, but being amazed that, really they're, I mean, they're all that from the start. There's always been this strong parallel alignment and relationship, and then there's lots of ancient wisdoms, from the Stoic days of the Marcus Aurelius, all the way through that, we're discovering, and I think we're lucky to be at a time where we have such access to these things. We can go back and read and discover ancient texts or learn about so and so. I've been listening to just recently autobiography of a yogi, which was written in I think 1940 something, about a Hindu yogi who in his kind of spiritual journey. It's quite amazing. And then that actually in 1971 Steve Jobs read and had this kind of whole journey, and then he went to India and he was like this popular book, and one of my teachers said they gave it out at his funeral, Steve Jobs' funeral. So I find it fascinating that even someone of his kind of stature and legacy and iconic kind of entrepreneurial I had, there's some relationship there, and it's, we're all trying to figure it out and understand the two, and they're not exclusive. It's just looking at how they align, and sometimes it means just changing your language so that it's okay. If the word God has too much of a stigma for you because we've been watching The Simpsons for 20 years, I get it. Find a word that made sense. The creative force in the universe. The merciful. Like, I think people should feel okay exploring that, and in your heart you'll know when you're finding the truth and the right things for you.
That resonates a lot with me. We are slowly running out of time, Peter. I have a bunch of questions I would love to hear you about. I will try and get two small before I ask you about the final advice for the listeners. So the one is like, if you had to give yourself an advice, a 10-year younger version of yourself, what do you think that advice would be?
Oh, great question. Well, probably lots of things, but why is it the first thing that came to my head is like invest in Bitcoin? That came to head. No, I think I could do better, and just in terms of my nutrition and exercise, basic things like that. I feel like if you're in startup digital product world, it's very easy to just get into the habit of sitting and being screen focused. So I think I could have done better there. And my father-in-law is actually a doctor, like a GP. So I'm fortunate that I've got his loving, critical lens into my, health, and feel like that could be better. But it's the journey of figuring it out. So that's some just good, simple advice. I think is,
Yeah.
Eat better, exercise more.
Cool. And so if I ask you in 10 years time, so what do you think a 10-year older Peter Gould would say?
You should listen to Mads more. You should hang out with him and be in his class, the Ludo hang around his crew. I think that would be good advice. I think just it's a really great question, Mads. I think it's maybe embracing this sense of surrender a little more, right? Even though I talk about it, it's much more difficult to practice. And there's a great book called The Surrender Experiment, Michael Singer, I think, who talks about building this incredible company, but when he was really trying not to. And but it's, I think in 10 years time it'd be like, just surrender a little more. Like, it's okay, things that you stress about now are not important, and just embrace breathing and just embrace the flow a little more than let things design you rather than you trying to design everything.
I think that resonates with a lot of listeners as well. That's definitely something that resonates with me. The whole letting go a little bit. For me, I think it's when I'm gonna look back, it's gonna be one of the things of prioritizing more time with friends that give energy. I have a tendency to get all caught up, that everything disappears around me when I'm doing different projects. So time disappears. So if my friends are not involved in the task, I can have a tendency that I don't get enough time to see them.
Yeah, that's a great it's good that you observe that from now. I think that's a great thing that you see. And you know, of course, if you know, any parent will always say you can't spend enough time with your kids, you know, especially while they're young. Just you know, always integrating that into your life rather than, you know, looking at work-life balance. I think we're in the era, global time zones of work-life integration. So how do you integrate? How do you design that day as best you can, or that week? I know I can do much better at that. But, you know, I remember there's that reading about that study, which is the woman who is a nurse in palliative care. And you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And it's like top 10 regrets of the dying, I think it was called. And it's kind of a macabre title, but it's so powerful. And for men, it was men and women. For men, the number one was I worked too much. You know, like I wish I was more with my kids. So that seems like a pretty timeless bit of advice to give ourselves.
Yes, for sure. So before we round off, two things. Where can people find out more about you, Peter? I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, sure. So you can just Google my name, Peter Gould, but there's two Peter Goulds. One of them is an Academy Award-winning writer of the hit series Breaking Bad, and I'm the other one. So he's it's cool. We follow each other on Twitter, and sometimes he retweets my stuff, which is a little funny. And sometimes someone has read out his bio at an event I'm speaking at, which is hilarious because then people wanted autographs. Anyway, so just search my name on LinkedIn and Instagram. I try to be pretty active, sharing what was happening each week and each month with the design team. So yeah, and Instagram is just at Peter Gould Art. So we'll hopefully connect there.
Great. I'll put it in. So before we round off, if you have to give 1 to 3 final advice, it might be something that you already mentioned.
Yeah, I you know, it's whatever happens and things are going on in life, and whatever state of the journey you're on each day, each minute, it's like, I think gratitude is still just it's just what will always bring a bit of calmness and tranquility to you. And just, you know, however you express that, or you know, bring yourself into that state. You know, you're always at any one point has incredible amount of gifts and blessings. You know, if you have, if you can see, if you can hear, if you can breathe healthily, if you're in a safe place, and you know this now. So, you know, just gratitude, trying to embrace that as your active mindset. I think it will help everyone, whatever they're up to in their journey.
I think that's a beautiful advice. Peter, thank you so much for your time. I know you have a class waiting for you, so I can't keep you much longer. I really appreciate you finding the time.
Likewise, man. It's great to chat, and you know, really blessing to be with you.